When you think of painful submissions, maybe you think of Frank Mir. Maybe you think of Paul Harris. But what is the most painful submission? And that's what I want to talk about today. I'm joined by my partner, UFC vet, black belt, one of the baddest men in Canada, Mitch Clarke. Mitch, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I mean, considering I'm not in one of those submissions, I'm doing great.
Well, they're not made to tickle. That's the thing.
That's a fact. And you know, I think for the fans out there and for myself as well, not being put in those types of subs before, especially not competitively where someone's going for it, I think everyone would like to know what is the most painful submissions and what makes them the worst.
You know, I think it really depends on what's being attacked. You know, the thing is, in my opinion, heel hooks and knee bars and those type of things, they're the most damaging. But you don't feel anything really until the damage is done, until you hear the knee go pop, 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 you know. To get a response out of that it takes a lot of torque. You know, in my opinion, it's the shoulder locks and the arm locks. Those cause a lot of pain. You know, sometimes neck cranks. Chokes, you don't really feel anything. You just, you know, you have a nice little nap and then you wake up and ask what happened.
Well, that's you, Mitch. Now, you put a choke on me and I'm flopping like a fish because it's pure panic. But now you had mentioned something earlier about Shamrock and Bas Rutten.
That, in my opinion, is probably one of the most painful looking submissions. I believe it was their second fight. Shamrock gets the takedown. Ken Shamrock gets the takedown. He's in half guard, spins around for a knee bar, and you watch as he hyperextends that knee in a knee bar. And really, Bas Rutten's response is what tells everything about how painful it is. It's not often you see one of the toughest guys from the older days, the older generation, Bas Rutten, scream out in pain and tap that quick. And in my opinion, that's one of the most painful looking submissions, you know, in history.
Very true. I mean, and that makes me think of Frank Mir and Brock Lesnar in their first fight where he was able to get him to the knee bar. And Brock's a pretty big, tough guy, and he was doing a whole lot of tapping.
Oh, 100%. If you take a look at Frank Mir's list of, number one, he has so many submissions, but the way he throws them on and the amount of torque he creates, you know, you take that fight against Brock Lesnar, you take, you know, his armbar over Roberto Traverne, who's a world champion in jiu-jitsu when he was a purple belt. It's just the amount of torque he creates. Even when he fought Tank Abbott and he threw on a toe hold, and it looked like you could watch the feet break.
That's a great one. And if you remember, after that fight, Frank was being told he was going to get touched up, and he made sure to go right to the camera and tell you he is still pretty, that he did not get it by Tank. And listen, Frank's had some crazy submissions, and I don't remember the fight, his opponent. He was on his back, and the opponent had his hand through his arm on the mat. And Frank was able to just roll, and I guess it would be an armbar, a type of armbar.
Pete Williams. So what happens is that's a shoulder crank, and watching interviews with Frank Mir, he was talking about how he's trying to elicit a response to basically get the armbar. He's very well versed in them. And so he started cranking, and he got a little bit of a response, and so he just decided to crank it. And, you know, in my gym, we refer to that as a Mir lock now, and there's a reason. If you watch Pete Williams' face, how fast he taps, it's very similar to Bas Rutten with the screaming and tapping and wanting out of there ASAP.
Now, Mitch, you are a master on the ground, black belt, beyond a doubt. I've got to ask you, when you look at, you know, for yourself, when you're putting on a submission and you've got a guy and it's deep and you know it's tight, but he's not tapping, Is there anything that gives you pause to go full through and finish that sub, or is it just routine and from repetitive practice, you just go until he taps or the ref stops the fight?
I don't know, with that little bit of adrenaline, I never really think about their well-being at all. For me, it's about if you just have to think, if you were in that position with them, do you think that they would show mercy? And really, it's gladiator mentality. It's either the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and from me, it's always the thumbs down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you are fighting. You're in there fighting, and you're fighting for your life. The referee's job is to keep people alive, really, and enforce the rules. Now, I remember seeing the baddest man on the planet, Joe Warren, self-proclaimed, and the fight was stopped when he was put in a knee bar because he screamed.
It's a verbal submission. You know, we get told in the back beforehand, you scream, you're done. Like, I think another example of that is the Chael Sonnen fight against Paulo Fijo. In WEC, he gets caught in an armbar and he's dominating the fight, and he screams. He says, "I didn't tap." Well, when you scream in pain, that's taken as, you know, a sign of verbal submission. You know, he did the same thing when he fought Babalu. When he fought Babalu, he's caught in a heel hook and he's grabbing the cage and he's screaming. They should have stopped the fight right there, basically. It didn't really matter because he got armbarred. But, you know, I get it. You're tough and you're trying to work your way through. But, you know, the ref's trying to look out for your best interests.
Now, Paul Harris, and I believe his nickname in Brazil is the tree stump, and he gets a lot of, you know, he's called a dirty fighter, that he goes beyond, you know, finishing the subs when he gets a hold of that leg, and whether he's destroying the knee or what he's doing with the ankle. You know, what is it about? Because that submission to me looks like definitely one of the most painful, especially after having 6 knee surgeries. I'm pretty soft about the knees. Would you consider him, you know, someone that maybe goes a little too far? I mean, it's hard to say, especially as a fighter, Mitch, because you know yourself, when the ref stops, when the fighter is tapping, that doesn't mean you stop, because I think it's called a Brazilian tap. When you get a guy to tap just a little bit and you let go of the hold, he still fights.
So I think that really came from Matt Lindland against Bustamante, and he did a fake tap kind of thing, and, you know, luckily Bustamante still won. But back to what you're saying, the thing is, as soon as the referee makes contact with you and says stop, you have to stop. And we've seen several instances where that wasn't the case. Now, the thing is with, maybe people wouldn't think the same if it wasn't so based on the fact that this move the heel hook creates so much torque in such a small period of movement that it absolutely destroys, you know, your ACL, your MCL. You know, it rips up ligaments in your ankle. There's even been instances in, like, Pancrase when Boss Rutan dropped on one on, I believe, Takahashi, and he snapped his shin bone with the amount of torque that's created. The amount of power that's created with that is insane. So I think that's why a lot of people are up in arms with stuff like that, just because you create so much power and it's so damaging.
Yeah, and, you know, for me, I've been in a, you know, I've had the, I guess you might call it a benefit or the luxury of being put in a few submissions by professionals, and, you know, they went easy on me, but still, it went from, you know, uncomfortable to extreme pain in like that. So I don't think I would have had the ability to tap before the damage was done. You know, so is there a case when you're put in a sub, it's tight, and you know he could finish it, do you tap early? Because you just don't see that happen very often. Guys tough it out.
Well, it was something like that. You can't tough it out because you're, like, the idea, you take a look at Sambo they use a lot of heel hooks and stuff, and it's because it's a self-defense or a military tactic of when you maim someone, it takes several people off the field, right? And that's the reason why it's so effective in that type of arena. For this, someone like Taquino, like Pajares, he's creating so much power in a small period, and he launches his whole body, and he's built like a fire hydrant, and he's able to create so much power that, if as soon as you start to feel that pressure, if you don't tap by then, it's already done. Now you take a look at like, ADCC or World Championships, Nogi World Championships, Polaris, EBI, all these things. Sometimes when they have joint locks in all the way, they tap a little bit early because as a black belt, you're firing on all cylinders. You have the technique, and if you don't tap a little bit early, you're done. You're out for 6 months on whatever move that they're doing. Minus the choke, maybe.
And it's the choke, and that's something that you see, and I was speaking about this the other day, is the evolution of martial arts. People are talking the greatest of all time, and you really can't put a title on someone with that because it's their time frame. So they were the greatest in their time, but the sport's evolved so far. You see guys put in chokes, and you wonder, how is he conscious? And Mitch, is it just the fact that maybe you have an artery that's not all the way shut down? How do you get through that?
Sometimes it just takes, the pressure's just off by a centimeter, not putting all that pressure on, and you get a little bit of a breather, a little bit of blood. Like when I fought Michael Chiesa, he had one of the rear naked chokes in super, super tight, but I was able to create enough space by getting my fingers in at his two attachment points at his elbow and his wrist, and I was doing a crunch, and that constant pressure from me was enough to keep me in the game long enough to make to the end of the fight.
Mitch, that was a little more than tight, brother. That was vicious, and that's one of Chiesa's go-to moves. I mean, and you know what? He is a big guy for the weight division. When I stood next to him, I'm 6 foot tall, or I used to be. He was a lot taller than I was, it seemed, and he's a big guy to be cutting down to the weight. So to me, that shows, obviously you're comfortable in the position. If you were like me, someone gets hold of your neck, you're not comfortable. It is a natural reaction to want to breathe. So is the choke that gets on the esophagus, the air choke, is that something versus the blood choke? Now, the blood choke, obviously, you're going to go unconscious. It's lack of oxygen, but also, when you can't breathe, it becomes lack of oxygen as well. What are the differences? What types of chokes? Let's say a Darce choke or a rear naked choke.
Like a lot of them, most of the time when you see submissions or people being submitted, it's a blood choke because either they're going to go unconscious. A lot of them, like on the windpipe, the air choke, usually it hurts is the big thing, is putting so much pressure on your larynx, and it hurts like the damnedest. It hurts so bad. But, sometimes you can kind of tough it out depending on if you're comfortable in that position. The other time you see people tap out is from the neck cranks. Basically it's a choke, but it's not choking all the way, but you force it with a neck crank. And certain submissions, like even forms of the Darce choke and stuff like that, I modify it slightly when I do it to be a neck crank at the same time to create as much pressure, because the more that neck's not engaged, the more pressure you're able to put on that neck, and less he's able to fight out of it. So those are the keys for me, is just get around that neck and
squeeze. Similar to a triangle, when you're able to get the arm across the body and then close that up, you're pretty much closing everything down, right? The wind and the blood.
Yeah, well, the thing is, too, is when they first teach you triangles, that's the main thing. But as you get better, the key concept is your legs on one side of the neck, and on the other is basically their shoulder or their arm is putting pressure on the other side of the carotid, and you're creating that triangle. and putting pressure all the way on the neck and just kind of cutting everything off. So that the arm triangle similar, but also if you take a look, Darce, Anacondas, there's the same idea except you're not using your legs. So it's a triangle choke, right?
Now, it was the Von Flu, and some are calling it the St. Preux or the Von Preux, right? And I've always wondered, guys have to know they're in that position. They're trying to hold on to the head too long, and you get a guy to drive his shoulder into your neck, cutting the blood off and using your shoulder to finish it. Does it happen that quick?
Some guys, Sheldon Westcott's a good case. He got it from half guard in Tough Nations. Von Flu did it. But the main thing is, if you're doing it correctly, and you shouldn't be holding on to the head, obviously, but if I get caught in a guillotine and I pass, I'm going to take my arm, swim it over, and trap their hand so they can't pull it out. They've already established the bad position. I'm going to keep them in the bad position. Now, as you get better and you keep that shoulder pressure on the neck, you want to basically rolling pin that shoulder, press basically on that larynx, put pressure out, and they're getting choked from both sides. So you're just kind of expanding on your choke, but with more shoulder pressure. But the key is, they probably know that they messed up, but, I'm not letting them get that position back. I'm going to lock it down, and it's, too bad, so sad kind of thing.
Exactly. Now, you've been competing for a long time, Mitch. I mean, to become a black belt, it takes years. What is your worst moment and what is your best moment when it comes to submissions?
For me, best moment's going to always come down to, my choke on Ally Quinta. For me, it's, and I'm going to be biased, but I think it's one of the slicker submissions that's been pulled off in the UFC, pretty much ever.
I mean, it's hard to argue. I mean, Al comes in throwing heat, too. And, when the guy's out, he's just wide open, talking to God, eyes wide open, and just out.
Now, for me, I only have one. I've only been submitted once, and for me, it sucks. When I fought Joe Duffy, and he hit me, and I went to take a step, and my knee blew out. And, I just kind of went on default mode, kind of started looking, invert a little bit. I think he hit me once or twice. And I was trying to, invert out and stay safe, and he takes my back, and he grabs the rear naked. There's nothing he can do in situations like that, and it's just disappointment more than anything. He's a good, tough guy, and unfortunately I didn't really get to fight that fight the way I wanted to. It still sucks, but it's one of those things that it happens, unfortunately.
It really, for me, it speaks to how tough and dedicated guys are when they're in the cage and they're caught. And the only way out is to tap. I mean, they're literally caught. They're not tapping, so they go to sleep. What can you say about the body triangle when you've got someone, especially if they're face down, and you're able to lock that in right under the ribs and put pressure and weight? That can really, I know guys that have had their backs really messed up from that position there. And it's actually illegal in some forms of
Yeah, you create a lot of power. You got to think of how powerful those hips are. And I basically put all my hips straight down, using my pelvis basically as a fulcrum straight down, and I'm able to generate a lot of power from that position. The key is if I'm flat on the ground, all I can do is absorb all that power. It's enough power definitely to herniate a disc in your back. So the key is not getting caught there. As back to Akisa had that position, and as soon as he went to flatten me out, my hands were underneath my shoulders, posturing up and trying to flip over to put pressure on his foot where the triangle kind of inserts. But it's a tough position. A guy like that, nice long guy with good jiu-jitsu, able to lock up your hips. You don't get any movement, and you can't scramble out. You can't get anything going. So it's a super tough thing. And if you look at when Ivan Salveri fought Tony Strickland in the UFC, that's where the finish occurred. Was just he was able to create so much pressure down that it seemed to really hurt Strickland. He was trying to get guys to rub his back because there's just so much pressure created. And in all honesty, I may use my cup as well as a weapon. If I have your back, I'm gonna dig that cup. I have one of the best cups available, the Diamond MMA Cup. It's the best thing you can have, and I'm gonna dig that bad boy into your back.
There you go, guys. Diamond MMA. If you want a good cup that not only protects you, but you can use it as well. There you go, Diamond MMA. Okay, Mitch. Before we get out of here, when you think of the sport, and over the years, obviously, as I said, it's evolved so much. Jiu-jitsu, the transitions, the ability to have a well-rounded game. We don't just see a striker. We don't just see a wrestler. We see guys that are good everywhere now. Who is the best from the old time that you look at as far as submissions besides Gracie? Because Gracie started the whole ball rolling. But who's the guy out there that you really can say that guy is really deadly on the mat? Would it be a Damian Maia?
You got to say, a Damian Maia. But if you go for someone who's causing sheer damage, in my opinion, the only person you pick is Frank Mir.
I have been a Frank Mir fan for a long, long time. I loved listening to him call the fights in the WEC. That's a guy that's overcome adversity, with his injury on the motorcycle, UFC champ multiple times, now fighting in Bellator. We've got some older guys coming in there fighting in Bellator, the heavyweight tournament. That's exciting. I'm curious to see what Frank does. He's a big, big guy, and he is deadly on the ground for sure. And, we've seen him break multiple bones now in his career. So, yeah, I think I would have to go with Frank Mir as well, no doubt.
If you take a look at just his resume of guys he's messed up, Tim Sylvia, he didn't even break the arm on the elbow. He broke it on the forearm. So he's able to create so much torque, the Tank Abbott. But really the big one and the grossest one is Nogueira against Big Nog. Snapping that arm, it was just,
the thing with that for me was, once Mir was hurt so bad, you wondered, how is he even thinking straight? Because he was, had Nogueira step back and just kept throwing, he could have finished that fight. But when they rolled, when they were scrambling and Mir got that arm, and then they rolled over again, that was so deep and so tight, and Frank snapped that thing. That was vicious. You could actually hear it. And, that's something that to come back from an injury like that, that says a lot. But again, Nogueira was looked at as possibly the best on the ground as a heavyweight as well.
For years, he was one of the best guys, in terms of... He accumulated so much damage throughout his career. I think people also overlook Frank Mir, how good he was. And because he had 2 or 3 mediocre / bad performances after his motorcycle accident, they really overlooked how good he was. And, he's had some really good fights and he's had some not so good fights. And, he's a very talented athlete and he's has a beautiful submission artist. And I think he doesn't get the credit he deserves.
I agree
sometimes.
with you. And the one thing I'll say about Frank, when I seen Frank fight in Orthodox and he dropped Bigfoot Silva with a check hook, I was losing my mind as a guy from boxing. Frank Mir just dropped a guy with a check hook. Who was training him? And it was Angelo Reyes, who, he was Freddie Roach's understudy for years at Wild Card, and he's now training in MMA, and he's done some great things too. And Mir, I agree with you. Mir has evolved as a fighter. He's stayed in the game. He's not got the respect he deserves. A lot of people, they look at Frank and he seems a little uppity. I thought Frank was one of the nicest guys that I had met, in the sport. He was a real good guy and extremely talented, extremely big. A lot of people don't realize Frank is that big, very strong, Yeah, I had nothing but respect for Mir. So, Mitch, before we get out of here, what are you doing? I mean, I know, and I won't even bring it up because it makes me really angry. So I'm not going to touch on headbutts, but what are you doing now? I know wrestling is playing a big role.
Yeah, I'm wrestling for the varsity team for the University of Alberta Gold Bears. I still had eligibility left, so we're wrestling for them. We have such a talented team. We have so many great athletes, as well as competing in jiu-jitsu and started pro wrestling. And, I'm back in school. I'm taking education right now, and it takes a lot of time, and, I'm able to enjoy the sports I'm doing, and it's a good time. I'm keeping busy. I'm probably busier now than when I was fighting full time.
With that, very busy. And listen, when you go from competing as one of the best fighters in the world, and you get out of that, that's hard to do. Very few guys do that successfully, and you are one that has transitioned, and you're still plugging away. It's very admirable what you're doing, especially finishing your education. That's something, all you young guys out there, you don't want to put all your eggs in the one basket because someone like Frank Mir can break your basket. So you might want to get that education. Hey, any shout-outs, Mitch? Any sponsors? Anybody out there besides Diamond?
Diamond's always been great to me. I also got to take a look at damage control mouth guards. Even though I'm not fighting, I still use my mouth guard in wrestling. I also got to say a big thank you to Legion Athletics and the Clinch Fight Shop. They're both great to me. It just I feel very lucky to be surrounded by such great people all the time. And I want to say a big thank you to you, Dan.
Well, thank you, Mitch. I appreciate that, brother. I was getting ready to thank your dad because you have got one of the coolest dads. Now, I'm 50 years old, so I've got something in common with him. But I've got to tell you, that is a very intelligent, very competitive. I can see where you got a lot of your competitive streak from. Out there playing hockey after 25 years, Rick, man, nothing but respect to you as well. Hey, Mitch, thank you so much, brother, for coming on. And, guys, we will be putting out a show. We're working on it right now. So not only doing color commentary with this man, we are going to be coming at you with the show and bringing you everything that we can. This was important to me. I really wanted to talk about the worst submissions, the most painful. And you have enlightened me, Mitch. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
For Mitch Clarke, for Modern Pugilist Entertainment, I'm Dan Cox, and we will see you next time.